Okay, so we are continuing our work through this concept of the image of God. If you're visiting with us, welcome, by the way. I meant to do that. I usually do. So if you're visiting with us, we're so glad you're here. If you're from like hundreds of miles away, you're welcome to come every week. That's cool. We're fine with that. If you're, I'm kidding, obviously, but if you live around here, we would love for you to come spend a good chunk of your life here with us. Come bless us with you and let us be a blessing in your life too. And if you're not a Christian, well, good for you coming to a Christian worship service. That can't be easy. We would love to talk with you about why we follow Jesus and invite you to do the same. This is, I don't know, 6th, 7th in a series that we're working through on the image of God. Last week we looked at how the gospel restores the image of God. And this morning I want to spend some time talking with you about church. I think it's really important to realize that church is Christ's idea. That what you're participating in right now is not something that somebody came up with other than God himself. Jesus Christ planned for you to have what you're in right now. At the big turning point in the gospel, Jesus asks the apostles, who do people say that I am? And they say, well, some people say you're this person, maybe you're Elijah, maybe you're that person, I don't know. Yeah. And he says, okay, but you know me. Who do you say that I am? And he says, Peter replies, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father is in heaven. God is the one who revealed that truth. And that truth is so important. He says, and I tell you, you're Peter, and on this rock of that confession, I'm going to build my church. The truth that I am the Christ is going to serve as the foundation for a new government, a new way of people getting together. The church means a gathering of people. It was the word ecclesia was used by the Greeks to describe a government gathering where the citizens of a government would come together and make law together and figure out what kind of society they're going to live in. He says, this is going to be one of those. And I'm building it based on what you just said. And hell's not going to be able to stand against this. There's an enemy empire. My church is stronger than that enemy empire. I'm going to invade that enemy empire and take its citizens away. Because they're going to end up being part of my government. That's what I'm going to build. And it's all going to be built on what the Father has revealed to you, Peter. This truth of who I am. I am king of this new government. So it's got to be great, right? And it is. It's great. It's wonderful. And that's your constant and always experience. And if you wonder about that, shut up. No, church is hard, isn't it? In fact, probably no single thing keeps people away from Christianity more than does church. In fact, there are an awful lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I don't go to church. As though Christianity and church were like separate things. You know, like you could believe all the Christianity stuff and blow off church. No. The faith involves church. It's for church that Christ died. It's to establish church that Christ died. But why would that be so? Well, because it's hard. Church is really tough. You know, and I don't care what kind of pageantry you put on it and what kind of beauty you establish around it, whether it's super elegant or you go to a place that feels like it's breaking down. It all feels like it's breaking down, right? I mean, any gathering of human beings that have sin messed up in them and have the image so badly damaged, even as we're being restored and renewed, when we come together, we're going to hurt each other. And it feels dangerous to be inside a church sometimes. Not always. Maybe that's not always been your experience. Live long enough. It will be. You know, and it seems sometimes like this beautiful, wondrous thing has become this abandoned mess. You wonder, am I even finding God here at all? It's why people are so often so tempted to be like, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I hate church and I'm not going. May God save us from such foolishness. Because it's not some... I mean, you know, speaking of may God save us, it can get really toxic and really bad, can't it? You ever been in part of it when it's really toxic? Hopefully you've never been... I'm sorry. I showed a bunch of pictures of buildings, and I meant to mention this. It's obviously not the buildings that are the problem. That's all metaphor. The thing that's broken and troubled is not the building, it's us. The broken places are in the relationships. Because you see, what church is the raw material of broken images that God brings together in order to restore the image. You know, and so you have this situation. Look at the look on her face. Now, I don't usually look at people like that. I have a better poker face than this woman apparently has. But have you ever been sitting there in relationship with somebody where that look was inside your heart? Maybe it was even on your face where you're like, what? What did you just do? What did you just... And when you go home and you're with your friends, your family, you know, you just unload. You're like, I can't believe what did they... You ever been there? You ever been part of a church? I was going to say, it can get super toxic. It can even be deadly. I mean, church literally can be deadly. It can be figuratively deadly to your soul. Because participation in church, where you run into somebody who is a judgmental freak, and they mistreat you really badly, it can drive you away from the faith. If you let it. But it could even be deadly. You ever hear of that guy? You know who that is? It is David Koresh. Wow. I thought I would actually have a moment where I could reveal something I knew. But we know exactly what happened to his little church, right? You know who that guy is? Yeah. I'm not going to show you the picture of what happened to his church. Church can be nutty and crazy and deadly. It can be toxic. It can be so hard. You know, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I am going to ask you to think on it. How many of us here have not been in a place where church hurt you? Where you sat with church going, ow. Church pains can go so deep, too, because they go to the very center of who we are and what we believe. When church wounds you, it's a deep wound. And it's enough to make you ask, why would anybody sign up for this? Why would anybody want to participate in this thing? Now, I got to say at the outset, some of it is what we make church to be, because so very often we treat church like it's one of these. Anybody ever sign up for one of these? You know, what this thing is it's a place where you sign up for it and you go and you look at some machines that you're never going to use, and then every month they take your money, but you don't go. Okay? That's what that is. But very often we're going to treat church like, you know, we get rid of the word health and we put the word worship on. Because when you go to a health club, it's supposed to be there for your health. Everything they make it really clear. It's all about you here. We want to make sure that we serve you so that we get your money. Okay? And there are an awful lot of churches that seem to feel just about that way, where it's all about serving you and you get to have this experience of worship so we can have your money. You treat church like that, it's going to do about as much good for your spiritual health as a lot of health clubs do for your physical health. You know, or maybe it's more like the pristine halls of the academy. You know, a lot of churches are treated like it's a place where you can come and learn some interesting stuff. Or perhaps it's a place you go to get your life worked out, and you're supposed to go get counseling and stuff. Maybe that's what it's for. Or perhaps it's, you know, a place to have a couple of moments of silence, right? Where you can get your head straight for the week so that the rugrats are somewhere else and there's somebody else's problems for a little while. And you can, you know, is it any wonder that so often the way we treat church, those ways, it leads people to such discouragement with church? You ever been frustrated with it? You're obviously here, so you haven't given up on it. But it is a hard thing, isn't it? Or it can be. You know, What if none of that we've just been looking at is what it's for? I'm fairly certain the way that Jim Jones used church is not what it's for. But what if it's also not meant to be a worship club or a therapy place? What if there's something that it's supposed to accomplish in us? And that if we think deeply about what that thing is, maybe we're better prepared to utilize it and cooperate with it, with what God is doing in it. I used a whole bunch of metaphors just a moment ago. The metaphor I'd like to put in front of you this morning is this. I love that picture, by the way. I don't know where that is, but I want to go to there. It is so pretty, isn't it? I don't know how to use any of those tools. I would be absolutely useless in that place, but I'm fairly certain that that's a workbench, a place where woodworking is done. You know, a place where a master craftsman who knows what they're doing can come in there and maybe pull something out of one of those slots and get to work, or one of those hoops off the, what on earth is that for? But he gets to work on that. Maybe he wets down some wood and wraps it around that. And by the time that he's done, he's got something beautiful. Because the real thing of this, the important thing in that workshop is that there is, in fact, a craftsman in there who is working. See, I think you are sitting right now in God's restoration workshop, where He takes His beautiful pieces of art and He uses wondrous tools to reshape and reform what you are into what you will be. That's what this is for. God doesn't sit down with His ego all week going, man, my creation ought to be worshiping me. I wish it would. And does He deserve it? Sure. Does He need it? No. He does not need your songs. He is not broke. He doesn't need your money. He doesn't pull this together because of His needs. He pulls church together because you so desperately need the gospel. And you so desperately need a community of people in which He is at work. Because both what He's working on and what He's using to do the work are this. You. You are both the work He's working on and the tool He will use to work on somebody else. We are both the piece of art and the chisel at the same time, or maybe at different times. God uses church to reshape the image. It's how we get there. Now look, last week we looked at this truth. The gospel is the power of God to restore His image in people. That's the power to accomplish it. That amazing story does amazing things to us, but it is the church where He uses it. You aren't just transformed by reading the gospel yourself. To some degree you can be. But to some degree, if you really want to become like God, you must be in church. Now, this is such an audacious claim for anybody who has been in church and encountered people who are still very much broken images. It seems like he doesn't do it here. Especially when you encounter people, in the world around us who have never set foot in church and never will, and yet they seem so much less distorted than some Christians. Anybody ever have that experience? And church can be a place where Christians who ought to be good and beautiful are really mean to each other. This can seem like such an audacious claim. It is absolute theological certainty. I don't kind of think this. I know this is true. The church is the place where God changes people. And is it the only place? Is His power limited to here? No. Can a craftsman pick up a tool and go out and work in the woods? Sure. God is what changes people. And if He wants to do it somewhere else, but this is His workshop. You want to get worked on? This is a place to come. Come encounter God here. Now, there are at least three main ways that God works in church to restore the image of God. Are there other ways? I suppose. I have a limited brain. But these are the ways that I can see that are very obvious where God works in church in order to restore things. And I'm going to tell you a little secret. I've dogged on church a good bit so far. I want you to know that my experience with church has often been good and beautiful and wonderful. But I think it is built into the nature of church that church is not a lot of fun all the time. In fact, it is designed sometimes to be very, very painful. And when we don't tell people that, we get them ready to jettison everything when church is no fun. Church is not meant to be a theme park for you to enjoy. It is meant to be a place where you have surgery done to you and you are transformed and changed from one degree of glory to another. So here are three main ways. One is the preaching and teaching the gospel. Where else are you going to find that? Another is the overwhelming kindness and support that you encounter in church. You won't get what you get here other places. Because this place, it's in the DNA. And then there's the opportunity to practice discipleship in response to the failure of others. And see, that's the main thing I've been talking about up to now. Where church is so hard, church is full of failure. Yes, it is. Congratulations, Sherlock. You discovered something that is very obvious. But it's also very intentional. What are you going to do? Let's look at each of these briefly. The gospel we talked about last week is the power to save. And folks, the gospel is the property of the church. It was given to church, and church is the custodian of the gospel. We are supposed to announce the gospel to one another. Where do you go to do this? To take the supper. You go to church, and you participate in this ritual that pulls you back to cross again and again, and you settle your heart into the gospel. Why do we do it each week? Well, in part because it seems like the early church was. But in part because we need it. It is the chiseling of our distorted and broken hearts. It leads us again to the truth that Jesus died for me and called me to take up the cross. And so I come to the table and I'm reformed by it. What are you doing right now? You are settling yourself into the truth of what Jesus established for you. Into that Word of God, that Jesus built this church and that He's working in it and through it. You come here to hear preaching and you come here to do the table. You come to sing the songs. Why do you sing songs? Because it settles truth into who you are. Words are so much easier to memorize when they have a melody. And have you ever had the moment where you wake up with a song in your heart? Either a song of praise that you really need to give something good to God, or maybe a song of lament because you need to go through. Where did you learn that? Here. You need this. And remember, the gospel works on those three levels. And here you are impacted by the emotion of it. And here you are reasoning together as we study the Scripture together, as we think together with each other. And here you receive re-encouragement to draw upon the power of God. The gospel works in church because God gave it to the church. It belongs to the church. And honestly, I've already asked it, but church is where you encounter this. Where else do you go to get it? There's no civic organization that's doing this. It belongs here. It's happening here. And so God's great recreative power is happening. And when you come to worship, you settle yourself into that recreative power again. And so this is huge. You know, the lathe is turning right now. If you settle your heart into His hands while this is going on, you will change over time. But folks, this is only part of it. Because you know, it is possible to come and to hear the gospel and to sit there just as much an isolated individual as when you came. You can come, you can check in to the moment, and you can check out and run away and build no relationships. Let me ask you, how are you going to bear the image of God if you do that? Do you remember when he said, I am going to make man in my image? No, you don't, because that isn't what he said. He said, let us make man in our image. In order to bear the image of God, you must be in relationship, period. Your God is a relationship. Your God is love. And love requires both one to have the decision to love and one to receive the love. In order to bear the image of God, you must live in relationship with others. So if you're going to be what God intended you to be, you need church. You need church to do it. You've got to be with other people. And you've got to be interacting. But what kind of interaction are you supposed to have? Well, that moves us into the next level, where you experience God working through His people as God intends. And when that happens, in the midst of pain and the troubles of this world, you receive this and encourages you to become this. Okay? So when church is healthy, when we are good to one another, then the gospel calls us into a particular kind of relationship experience. It encourages us to look at one another's needs and respond to them, and to lift one another up. How do I know? Because of all the one another's in the New Testament. You see, the church is being formed by these commandments to be good to one another that come to us by the Spirit through Paul and Peter and the apostles. These commandments, once the church exists, we are told exactly how to treat one another. And when we do it, it's amazing. Let's run through a few of them, shall we? Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Let us not pass judgment on one another, but rather decide never to put a stumbling block or a hindrance in the way of a brother. Welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God. Aim for restoration, comfort one another, agree with one another, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. Through love, serve one another. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, concerning brotherly love, you have no need of anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing. And the love of every one of you for one another is increasing. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. When we are part of a community, listen to this, when we are part of a community, we take on the approved way of life that is supported by the values of that community. Okay? Now, if you treat this like a worship club where you come, you check in, you check out, well, it may not do that to you. But if you build friendships here, if you have relationships here, if you are ever vulnerable with another Christian and let them know what you need and you find their support and their care, if you discover the affection and the love of the church, it is a thing that shapes you. When Ash and I were relatively new in ministry, we hadn't been doing this for very long. I don't know, 4 years or so. We discovered that we were expecting a little one. It was 6 years. And we had wanted a kid for a while, but we'd had a lot of trouble. It wasn't. So when I discovered that we were going to have a kid, obviously we talked about it first, but I announced to the church that we were having children by putting a little set of booties up on the pulpit. I said, I just have a little announcement. Here's my visual aid. Everybody kind of melted a little bit. There was a lot of oohing and awing. It's great. And then we lost that child. It's hard for me to talk about to this day. It was so immensely painful. If you've been through that, then you know that you really have lost a kid. If you haven't been through it, you don't know. It's like, oh, something didn't work out. No, I had already had the design for the treehouse I was going to build. It's devastating. For 3 weeks, I didn't cook. We didn't cook one meal for 3 weeks. Because people just showed up with food. And some of them would come in and sit down with us and sit with tears on their cheeks, not say a word. Some of them would just stand on the porch. I cannot tell you the power of God as He worked through that disaster in our life, through the church. The amount of shaping that God did to me in that month, where I grieved and I shook my fist at heaven and asked Him why. Was I not good enough to be a dad? I hurt so bad, but I was so loved. I was precious to these people. And it was because of their commitment to God and to Christ Jesus, our Lord. And because of their commitment to everything that you just heard. They said they were going to do it, and they did. And you want to talk about a shaping experience. For Ashley and I, church moved from this great idea that we participated in because we grew up in it to our family. And I've never been able to think of church any differently, ever again. But every single person who brought us food was also being shaped by the process. Every person who cried for us. The people who rented movies and said, look, don't do anything today. Just watch these. Just recover. Just get better. All of that love shaped everybody. Have you ever been in something like that? Where the church was the church, the way you needed it to be? Because when you are, the Lord God has picked up His chisel and He is carving or maybe replacing what's missing and putting into us what needs to be in us if we are going to be the image of God. He uses the gospel in the people to change the people. And each of us changes the other. This is what church is for. You been there? And I tell you, God uses the church to shape the image. Participation in church, it changes us. But there is this other thing. The way this sermon began was with the question of why would anybody ever want to be a part of this thing? Because it fails. And oh my goodness, does it ever fail? And when it fails, it usually fails pretty badly. Sometimes there's like one or two members who are the traditional failure people for the church, who are kind of mean to everybody else. By the way, if that's you, cut it out. But that's not always the case. Very often, the very person that you admire most is the one who does the most damage to you. And what do we do when we let one another down? Brothers and sisters, it is built into the design. This is no accident, and this is not the church failing to be church. This is Christians failing to live up to what God expects of them, but it's not church failing to be church. Because what God has done in church is He has brought together people who are both redeemed and sinners. We are already rescued. You will never become any more saved than you are the day that Christ takes you on. It's done. And yet, has anyone ever met anybody who came up out of the waters of baptism and was still a little bit of a mess? If you've ever seen a mirror and you were baptized, that's you. I'm talking about you. We are still in this already not yet existence, which means that I won't live perfectly and neither will you. And yet God has pulled us together to be part of a community. And folks, if you doubt that, look at some of the other one another passages, because they're not all gorgeous. To have lawsuits with one another is already a defeat for you. Wait, what? They're suing each other. You ever been in a lawsuit? Because that's fun. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. Have you ever been in a church that could describe it? I have been in that church. That hurts. You know, when it says bite and devour one another, you ever have a Christian with their teeth clamped down on your leg? I've never had that literal experience, but I have been at the part where I'm like, please stop hurting me. Or please just leave my mom alone. What did she do to you? Cut it out, please. Been there? It hurts. Oh my goodness, it hurts. Or let us not be conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Why do you have to say stuff like that to people? Is it possible that in Galatia they're doing that? Or be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another. Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, forgiving is not a beautiful practice. It requires that you bear pain because somebody did something wrong. I thought this was church. We're supposed to love one another. Yes, and loving means forgiving and bearing one another. Bearing with one another, and if anyone has a complaint, forgiving each other as the Lord forgave you, so you must also forgive. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. This is church. You shouldn't have to say stuff like that. Of course you have to say stuff like that at church. You ever been in a church? Of course you do. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. All of those commandments presume failure on the part of either yourself or somebody else. And when that failure happens, how do you respond? I didn't say if that failure happens, by the way. I said when. When a Christian fails you, what are you going to do with it? Because you should expect Christians to bite your head off. You should expect Christians to let you down. They are what you are, a work in progress with sharp edges, and we cut each other. And what do we do then? Well, you obey Jesus. Or you don't. Suddenly you have a choice about what to do with them. You can go home and you can grumble and complain to one another. You can go out to lunch. Can you believe that you can do that if you want to. That is not obedience. That is not the gospel at work in your heart. That's something else. That's your Adam nature, your fallen nature, your broken nature. But you don't have to do that because you have the gospel. And the gospel is at work in your heart, and you can be different from that. So when somebody fails you, you can turn the other cheek. You can pray for those who persecute you, even if they're your siblings. You can refuse to be conceited with the conceited person. You can honor the person who dishonors you. You can love in response to hate. You can be a gospelized person. And when you do, and folks, you won't do it without the help of the Holy Spirit of God. When I was asking that question earlier, somebody over here said, pray. Yeah, you better, or you won't obey. But if you are with God, then the failure of the other person becomes the opportunity for you to be a Christian. And as you become a Christian, you grow in your image bearing. You become more and more like the God who loves His enemies, who loves them so much that while we were still enemies, Christ died for us. You become like that, and you begin to bear the image of God. And so the failures that happen in church are to be expected. They are not to be encouraged. And if you're doing that, cut it out. But it's okay, and it doesn't mean it's not a church. Because in that moment, we all fail, and we offer one another the opportunity to actually live as Christians. And the longer we live obedient to the Word, the more the Word grows up inside of us, and the more beautiful we become. It is part of the design, because this is the workshop. And let me tell you something. It hurts. I'm sure being on a lathe, if that thing had nerves, would not be real comfortable. I'm sure that having a chisel taken to, if it were alive and someone took a chisel to it, it would hurt. Of course it hurts. You were not invited. Jesus did not say, if anyone would come after me, let him take up his massage table and follow me. He said, take up your cross, and very often I will be your cross, and you will be mine. And to love you in spite of it all, and to be good to you when you are bad to me, and for me to be bad to you and you still to love me. That's the design of church. And when we do it, it hurts like crazy. To give up justice for the sake of love and forgiveness can be so hard, but it changes who you are. And you become more like God. You will find your way back to your original purpose. And this is what God is doing in church. This is what God is doing in church. That's why He built the thing in the first place. He built a workshop for salvation. And that's what you're sitting in. So you treat this thing like it's a worship club where you come in, check out, and you got no friends here. You're cutting yourself off from an awful lot of God's work. An awful lot of God's work will happen to you in the relationships that you have with other people. You need that. You need it not just because relationships are nice and good. You need it because they fail. You can still love. Or you're going to hit hard times. Where are you going to turn? God works through the relationships that He's establishing here. You need it. So much of the image rebuilding work that God does in us is accomplished outside of worship. Outside of what we do in this hour. Now, a lot of it's done here. You're being gospelized here. You're being trained in the gospel. You're experiencing gospel. You're settled in. A lot is done here. But this is not all of it. And I would suggest it's probably not most of it. So much of it happens when one disciple loves another, or a disciple fails another, and they love him anyway. And that's so much of church. Too many people, please hear this, too many people decide to bail out of church just as God begins to shape them. They are failed by somebody, it hurts, they're done. You ever heard of that? Well, they said something mean and I didn't like it. Oh, well, good job, Christian. Bail out on the relationship then, and you will stay at them. Stay in it. That doesn't mean the church gets to do whatever it wants to you. Of course not. There are churches that are abusive and awful, and people should have left Jim Jones. They really should have. I'm talking about in normal life, so many people are so ready to quit. Don't give up the faith. Stick with it in love, and you will become different. So I finished this sermon with this question. What are we doing with this church? How are we using it? Or perhaps more importantly, what is God doing with it? Is it shaping us? Are we being changed from one degree of glory into another? Is there something in the way? How is it working on your life? If you look into yourself and you're like, you know what? Church has never worked on me that way, but I want it to. We will pray for you. We absolutely will. It may be that you look into your life and you're like, you know what? Nothing you've talked about this morning has really anything to do with what I'm going through, but I do need the prayers of the church. Well, if that's you, let us know. If this morning you're subject to the invitation of Jesus Christ, there's room right here. Why don't you come while we stand and sing?